Greetings. Pray everyone is having a super day, super week. I'm Troy Lamel Stovall, the CEO of TEDCO, Maryland's engine for early stage technology investments. Couldn't be more happy today to have my guest here today. So just to give a little quick backdrop. So at TEDCO, I have a 19-person board, most of which is appointed by the governor, 4 positions, 2 by the Speaker of the House, and 2 by the Senate President. And so my guest today was one of I like to call my 19 bosses that I have. No one can have too many bosses. But in addition, I think the more intriguing thing is, as many of you know, part of my career, I was in higher ed. I still have a love for higher ed. And this gentleman leads one of our community colleges here in Maryland. So I couldn't be happier to have him both as, obviously, I said, my boss, but more importantly, a warrior in the space of trying to create and allow youth and others to gain the educational aspects they need. I'm here to introduce the Chesapeake College president, Dr. Clifford Coppersmith. Dr. Coppersmith, thank you for joining us today on TEDCO Talks.
Thank you, Troy. It's good to be with you.
Appreciate you, man. Well, look, I think I want to have a little bit of fun and let people a little bit of your background at the same time. And if someone just to look at you and just, let's take this visual of you, they make, like we all do, make certain presumptions about where people are from. But you've got a more interesting story about where you are from. And I think it'd be great for people to hear that.
Well, sure. I always talk about my origins. I was born in the West Indies. My grandparents worked for the colonial government in Trinidad and Tobago. My dad was hired to return to the island after school to work for TEDCO Oil. Trinidad is a huge oil producer. In fact, they also produce asphalt. Trinidad is one of the largest natural resources of asphalt in the world. So that's why we were there. My mother was an Army brat, and she also traveled a great deal in her young life. So both sides of my family are sort of wanderers in the world, and that has certainly been my case. We were basically returned to the United States when I was about 4. Spent a lot of time with them, traveling the country before my parents split up, and then we ended up in Western New York, where I largely grew up. And I consider Olean, New York, my hometown. But since being an adult myself, I have moved quite a lot. My wife often jokes that we don't go on vacation, we move. That's just been the aspects of my career. I've been in 4 state systems as an educator, first as faculty teaching history and anthropology, and then later, of course, becoming an administrator and rising to the level currently where I'm at as president of Chesapeake. Prior to my academic career, I served in the military, National Guard, Army Reserve as a commissioned officer, and I also did a stint with the Central Intelligence Agency as a military analyst, which was more or less an extension of my military service, but I did serve as a civilian in that capacity.
You have had a career and a journey. I like what my wife would say. She thinks we move way too much. She's always told me she's just going to die. Her next move is a coffin to get out of the house we're in now. She is not moving again. That is not going to happen.
Right.
But now back to Trinidad just real quick. So do you have Trinidad citizenship, or do you?
You never lose it. I do not carry a Trinidad passport. I probably would be eligible for one if I wanted to. I'm also eligible for a UK passport, but there's a lot of paperwork. I've been trying to get one, but because of COVID, I've had trouble working with the consulate in New York City. I had to get some birth certificates taken care of, and I'm still kind of in that process.
That's amazing.
As far as I know, I am eligible for Trinidadian citizenship. I actually was born before independence. So it was a crown colony before 1963, and I was born just the year prior. So it's a little convoluted, but I assume I'm eligible, but I've never taken advantage of it. I've never been back, although my brother and I arranged for my dad to be buried at sea off the shores of Trinidad when he passed away earlier in this decade.
Oh man, that is a beautiful story. That is absolutely a beautiful story. You've had a great journey. I know another part of your journey you didn't mention, but I want to allow you to talk about is your passion and your work with Boy Scouts. In the last few years, the Boy Scouts haven't gotten the best press. But I was a Cub Scout when I was growing up. But they clearly have been, forgetting the bad press and what's happened. They clearly have been a great avenue for young men to come through and learn leadership, learn community, and contribute to the community. But I know you're very passionate about the Boy Scouts.
Yeah, I've been involved with scouting since I was a young person. I joined my first troop, I believe, around 1973. And I pretty much have been associated with the organization since then. Certainly understand the difficulties of the past several years. Hopefully the national organization is exiting from that. I think that's in process. Probably in the last decade or so, I've mostly been involved in chairperson work and working on councils and so forth. Currently kind of taking a hiatus because of some commitments I've recently entered into, but I still remain a very strong friend of scouting. For me, it was emblematic in preparing me for adulthood. I was an Eagle Scout. Much of the leadership principles I've learned primarily came from that experience, and then, of course, expounded upon with my military service. But I do consider scouting was really a signature experience for me. I certainly had some negative experiences that we all do have in organizations, but largely scouting was very good for me, and I'm very proud of that association.
Good, great. That's great to hear. So let's stay with that for a minute. So again, my last fun thing here is, so talk about if Cliff could talk to the 16, 17-year-old version of Cliff, I guess he maybe was doing scouting, what would be the 2 or 3 things he would tell Cliff to say, man, this is what I need you to understand as you go on this journey?
I was actually thinking about the second thing, which we didn't talk about in our preparation for this yesterday. First thing is understanding the value of leadership as a commodity. I talk about this with young people all the time because I don't think it's something we really hear enough about when we're young, when we're kind of developing as individuals. And many of us begin those patterns that stay with us throughout our lives. And leadership is certainly one of those. The world is starved for it. Doesn't matter what field, what discipline, what professional area you're in as a person right now. Leadership is just a very in-demand commodity. And we need leaders. We need folks that go into the kind of businesses that you and I are both in, running things, organizing the work of others, putting together great teams. Mm-hmm. Something I've literally been doing. I kind of joke, I've been in middle-level management since I was 3 years old when my sister was born. I'm the eldest sibling in my family, and that leadership role actually for me began as a sibling in a family, but it's continued on. And as I've looked at my own career, I went into teaching thinking that pretty much was going to be it for me. I really loved it, but incredibly, I was drawn towards leadership really for the good of the institutions I was in, because there were no other choices, and somebody had to do the job. And I think many, many times that's what happens in many organizations where it's default. And I think if I'd been a young person, I would have realized I had a lot more to offer the world than I would have thought of when I was 16 or 17 years old.
You use the word leadership several times here. Give us your definition of what leadership means, and more importantly, what leadership isn't.
Well, I think there's a difference between leaders and managers. Mm-hmm. And I know in many fields, I see that managers become such by default. They're not trained particularly for the work. They rise to that level either because there's nobody else or because they're the senior person in the office. I saw this in public service. I certainly see it in my wife's experience as a healthcare worker. And many times those managers may not even have the interest in doing it, but they're called upon and really they have to take it because they don't have a choice, but they're certainly not developed. Leadership, I think, is much more deliberate, and it's where you are prepared through service, through training, through experience to actually play a proactive role in getting the job done. I'm a very mission-oriented person. Mm-hmm. That comes from my military training. I served nearly 12 years in the Army Reserve and National Guard, various places in the United States. And I just know that leadership piece is something that has to be developed. There is training. There is knowledge and technical skill that comes with that calling that's much more pronounced, much more deliberate than being a quote unquote manager. And I think that's something that we need to do a better job at in all of our operations, whether it's academia, whether it's private sector, whether it's public service. Leadership has to be developed. It has to be improved over time. And it has to be supported because it is a very stressful way of life. And I think that's another reason why people tend to avoid it, because it is seen as stressful. And you do have to give up something in order to occupy these roles.
And give up what? You say give up something. Give up what?
Well, certainly your time is not a 9 to 5 situation. And particularly my role, you're on call 24 hours a day. As we both know, we're in occupations where anything can happen because you're running and your enterprise is a very people-centered, people-organized, people-staffed activity. And so really the largest challenges are dealing with the vagaries and the day-to-day issues that come when you're dealing with lots of people and the decisions they make every day, both in the job and out of the job. And you just have to be ready for just unexpected things. And there's a certain level of stress that comes with that. And that's something I, of course, have learned about as I've evolved as a leader myself.
You talk about leadership, the development, because there's an old kind of theory around that leaders are more born than they are made. But you're making an argument, if I understand your argument, that they can be both.
I think they can be both, but I do lean towards the side that there are characteristics, personality traits that do lend themselves to people being good leaders. And I do know there are individuals who have no interest in being leaders. In my experience in academia, faculty, for the most part, are very interested in their fields, their disciplines, and they remain leaders, very effective leaders, if they're good teachers in the classroom. But I've known a lot of good faculty that's where they want to stay, and that's where they remain for their entire careers. Now there's many academic leaders that do the manager route, where they're kind of default and they go into it because they see the need and the requirement for it to be done. And many times they kind of go back and forth between the job they really love, which is teaching, and the job that they're called to do, which is leading or managing. And then, of course, there are, in my field, many people that go into leadership because they are motivated for whatever reason to do so, and they make that a career path.
Got it. When I was in higher ed, I used to joke that, for at least for 4 institutions, probably true for a community college too, is that, the problem with being a college president is you have no natural constituency, because, you could graduate students, raise money, but if you lose in football games or basketball games, you might get fired. Or you might win football games, raise money, but if you don't graduate students, you might get fired. And so there's these, to your point, there's this broad range of constituencies and stakeholders and quote customers that have to be managed. And on any given day, one of them might be the priority. Is that true for you?
Well, I think I have found, and the lesson I have learned is that the most important constituency is your board. And I think you would understand that as well, because you're in that same situation. But I do think when you have a good board, you're going to be in great shape if you know what you're doing. I have benefited very much from a very capable board. They are engaged. We have a very developed concept of how we run our boards. They do substantive work in subcommittees that are then brought to the general meetings. A lot of work is done in those subcommittees, and our board is fundamentally engaged appropriately in the strategic guidance and vision for the college. And what I have learned is that when you have that in place, that constituency can keep you out of a lot of trouble.
Amen.
He said we're all subject to the vagaries of our own market. We are an enterprise that has to basically at least break even every year. And we have to also, as you say, be successful in completing and graduating students. And for community colleges right now, that is a huge challenge. It always was. But with COVID and the aftermath of COVID, it's become even more important as we try to also deal with diversity, equity, and inclusion in making sure that everybody has access and everybody has the same access to completion and success as a student, whatever that means, whether it's short-term non-credit, whether it's an associate degree and terminal degree that goes to work, or you're going on to upper division education at baccalaureate level and beyond. That is where the crux of the business is right now. Because it used to be getting kids to college was the point.
Yep.
Now the point is getting them through college and getting completed so they have a degree or a credential at the end, and they can go to work or they can transfer, do whatever their ultimate objective is besides just getting into college.
No, I call it college's goal should be making their graduates or someone or completed, because sometimes they may not be completers, day one ready. Are they day one ready to either go to a graduate program or an undergraduate program, or to go work for somebody? But your last few comments really do open the door up for you to tell us about, because we have listeners literally from all over the planet. Tell us about Chesapeake College. Let's talk about what you're doing there at Chesapeake, and let's have a commercial for Chesapeake College.
Well, that's easy to do. Chesapeake's a wonderful campus. We're located on the Eastern Shore, roughly about a half hour from the end of the Bay Bridge. We're right off of Route 50. I must have driven by campus many times on my way down to Assateague Island, where I vacationed a lot when I lived in Pennsylvania. In the summertime, we used to have cornfields between us and the highway, and then unless you take notice of our sign right at the intersection with 213, very easy to miss us. We were founded in 1965 as Maryland's first regional college, and what that means is we're supported by more than one county, and in my case, 5. I have 5 counties that support our work. There are other campuses in the college system in Maryland that are supported by 3. And then, of course, most of the colleges have either a single support with either a city or town, Baltimore City, for example,
right,
or aligned with a county. So I have 5 county budgets to coordinate with and facilitate. That's one of the unique aspects of Chesapeake. So we've been here since 1965. The campus was had its first buildings constructed for purpose on the campus. They were completed around 1967. I'm the 6th president of Chesapeake, and we are a comprehensive rural, but we also, we have some very different aspects because we're so close to the Metroplex. And of course, Queen Anne's County is actually considered a suburban county within that reach of Annapolis and Baltimore. And that's, of course, where we're located. We're just across the border from Talbot County, but we serve all 5, beginning with Kent, Queen Anne's County, Caroline, Talbot, Dorchester. And, I've loved the relationship with our county governments. They're absolutely dedicated to college, very strongly supported by them financially. They're a third of our budget. The state, of course, is the other third. And then a third of our revenue comes from states or from students and tuition and fees. That's a very classic structure for a community college. We offer a broad portfolio, transfer, liberal arts and sciences, health professions, which we have a world-class facility with our HPAC building, the Health Professions and Athletics Center, which was just recently constructed in 2015. And then we are getting back into the business big time with skilled trades and these technical areas that are in so much demand. And we do a lot of continuing ed. That's roared back to life after COVID, in which it was asleep for much of that period because of COVID restrictions. But we are getting back into the business of getting students back on campus. Although right now we're about 60% online, which I do believe is a trend that is not going to change. So that technical piece of what we do in education has become more important than it was before COVID, when roughly about 30% of our schedule was online.
Well, you brought up COVID, so let's talk about that. It's actually it's a 2-part question, so forgive me. But the first part is kind of how Cliff personally kind of made his way through COVID, is making his way through COVID, particularly, back in 20 when we were all kind of really locked down. And what kind of what you were talking about with Chesapeake and maybe higher ed in general, what's going to be different? What have we really learned about ourselves, about higher ed, and how we teach and how we, do this learning paradigm that has to be different as we move out of COVID?
Well, first of all, as you would guess, and from your own experience, higher education has been in a huge, almost crisis/revolutionary pattern, even before COVID, with the onset of online education. That model of how we used to work with a classroom and labs on campus, students coming to campus, perhaps residing on campus, that model has been broken by COVID. And whatever was happening before COVID has been amplified, expanded, and put on steroids as a result of COVID. For example, I have faculty teaching online today that never would have even considered doing so before COVID.
Exactly.
But we absolutely had to make that transition. And we did it as well as we could with all the limitations and problems we had doing it. And that's accelerated our move towards the online environment using technical means to reach students. It's both positive and negative. I really do believe that many students are best served in the physical environment with direct proximity to instructors, technology on campus, the services we have on campus. But we are working against a preference that's now very well established in students to attend classes online and via distance.
Yep.
That's going to be a real challenge for us as we try to encourage students, particularly those that are not well served by the online environment, to come back to campus, at least in a hybrid sense, where there's a mix of that on-campus experience, which we know is valuable. It continues to be extremely viable, and the online environment, which offers that convenience for many of our students, particularly who have transportation challenges, who also have work schedules. Most of our students work, most of our students are part-time.
Yep.
And online access is a very important part of equity and access for students who otherwise would not be able to get to campus, say 4 days a week for a traditional schedule. So that's kind of been, I think, the most important impact of COVID. On the positive side, because of the resources that were provided for the federal and state government, we were able to transition more fully in terms of services. So not just instruction is available to students, but everything service-wise is available to students. Financial aid advising, academic advising, services through our library system. All of those things have been basically put on fast forward, and now we are NC SARA certified, which is a certification nationally that says that our online services and online instruction is
Congratulations.
the equal of our on-campus experience. And that was a very important thing for us. We had a 5-year goal to get there. Now it's done. COVID did that for us.
So what about you? What did you do to kind of pass the time, during those early days of COVID?
Well, it didn't last very long, but I actually started a model railroad that went absolutely nowhere. That was just to do something inside because we were in lockdown for a few months. But I found the job itself became even more intense and more demanding, working from home for that short period of time before we were back on campus. I did not have what I would say a lot of extra time. I think my job became more demanding.
Mm-hmm.
You know what it was like. When you did those Zoom schedules, nobody thought about giving you a break in between.
I know, exactly.
It was, you'd start at 8 o'clock in the morning, go up until 5 or 6 o'clock with Zoom calls, telephone conferences with direct reports, still dealing with the student issues you still have, the staff issues that always arise that actually became more of an issue and took more time. As we know, we're in the middle of the Great Resignation. And that began starting maybe about roughly 9 months ago as people began to take stock of their lives. A lot of people have decided to retire because that's the time to do it. We have not lost many people outside of the retirement thing, but we have lost people. People have given opportunities, particularly in the technical areas in which they worked, in which they could work from home, telework at a much higher salary. So we have experienced the Great Resignation ourselves. Right now, I think we have at least 11 full-time staff vacancies, which is really high for us. I mean, I have around 256 full-time employees, several hundred other part-timers. So that's just one of the challenges we are continuing to deal with, is this kind of fruit basket upset that I will call the post-COVID and COVID reality of the resetting of the job market, the expectations people have of more independence, and basically being more fulfilled and looking for that in some cases elsewhere.
No, now talking to you as my board member, we're going to talk about that whole thing about how the whole talent management piece. Because like you just said, I believe that it's not so much about compensation is still important, benefits are important, but one of the benefits is a flexible work schedule and allowing people to do things in a much different way than we've traditionally done them. And I think this resetting of the workforce, I think is a good thing, but it's going to be upsetting to a lot of people.
Well, it's for dinosaurs like me. I'm really married to being in the workplace. For me, managing the stresses and strains, it was really much preferable for me to have that dividing point between when I'm here in the office or on campus or traveling when I do my work with my community and being home. I found one of the things I did not like about working remotely was there's never an end to the workday.
That's exactly right.
It was just incredibly exhausting to start off at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning and still be working at 6 or 7 at night because you really felt like you had to. There was no dividing line between home and work. And that's one of the things, as in my generation, I think that's been harder for us to deal with. Younger folks, I think that that's just not something that bothers them. And, we have been accommodating telework. Obviously, the state is encouraging it with regulation and statute. But we also see that by preference, if we're going to keep our people and keep them happy, we have to give them that option.
So many places to go there, but talk about the state. As you probably are aware, the state just recently announced that they're going to change the job requirements for a number of jobs, such that a degree is no longer required. And you've used the word badging and certifications a couple of times in this conversation. I'd like you to talk to our audience about that, because I think, like you said, the traditional definition of higher ed, even in community college, was you show up, you get a degree. In community college, you either go get a job or you go to a 4-year institution. But now all of a sudden we move into a model, there's a lot of jobs that don't necessarily require a degree, They just require either an experience or a credentialing or sort of badging that says you couldn't do the job. How is that model beginning to shift what you do there in Chesapeake?
Well, that's a great question. And I got to say, I'm a bit conflicted about that. But I realize that in many cases, the degree requirements for many jobs were kind of put there by default by people who have college degrees. And that's kind of the culture. It's not just in the state of Maryland, it's everywhere you go. And there has been, I think, creep in using college degrees as just kind of the default requirement for any job. But in many cases for jobs that may or may not require that.
Right.
That being said, I do think that many jobs in the public sphere or the private sphere do require some level of training, some level of certification. I think for employers, and I'm not up to date on this, and so I'm sure some of your viewers may disagree with what I'm about to say. I still believe the college degree at whatever level, associate, bachelor's, master's, etc. I still think that that's the kind of standard credential that employers will be looking for. Although we certainly see that change, particularly in fields like IT,
yep,
where there's really strong technical skills that can be gained either through experience and on-the-job training or through badging, which is something I'm not too familiar with. It's been talked about now for 20 years. I don't see badging really taking over the credential market yet, but I do see certificates. And for example, in the skilled trades, whether it's the marine trades, which we are doing, welding, HVAC, there's just a number of credentials, and many times they stair step, building on both training, formal training and education, but also experience, apprenticeship, and so forth. I see that it's first of all always been there, but becoming more important as we see enormous demand by students for entry into the skilled trades, where there's just extraordinary opportunities for stability, for income, for a life, career, and for the ability to stay put if you want to stay in your local community. As you know, there's help wanted signs all over the place in these technical areas, whether it's health professions, the skilled trades, which is really on my focus as a college president right now, trying to get us back to where we used to be as a college with a real focus on that as part of our mission. I still think those credentials are vitally important. And what we're seeing, for example, in welding, a welding student comes in, they get their certificate, their first entry level, and they're employed. They're going off to work, but they will come back to us, or we can provide training and a continuing ed kind of approach for the employer, where we bring a trailer onto their workplace and provide that extra training they need to upgrade their credentials in order to meet the needs that these employers have. So that's my experience with that. But I know in IT particularly, that badging and certification thing is becoming really kind of the wave of the future rather than a college degree.
But you mentioned something there, this notion of, you call it stair stepping, I normally call it stacking, but the ability to get some training, whatever it is, some credentialing, go work, come back, build upon that, come back, and maybe that eventually leads to an associate or bachelor's degree. But the whole point is it's at their pace, it's at where they can afford it, where it makes sense for their family. And it's breaking up the traditional model, right, which says you have to come, be here for 2 years or 4 years and graduate. No, you could come and go as you need to go, what fits your lifestyle and what makes for your career and your family.
Absolutely. I'll give you an example. In the health professions, the first rung of that is a CNA, certified nursing assistant. And not every CNA is interested in moving onward and upward, but that CNA certification is very important in terms of getting into competitive programs, whether it's nursing or paramedic, where having that certification, having that experience working with patients in a healthcare setting is a definite advantage for you in the application process, and obviously has value. You know, you've already been through what they call that blood and poop barrier that many healthcare providers have to deal with. That is an important aspect of that stair stepping or credentialing process, where many people move onward and upward, sometimes with their employer covering the cost of their education, which of course I believe is a fantastic way to go to avoid debt and make an income at the same time.
Absolutely, absolutely. You said a couple of times in this conversation, you've either used the words diversity, equity, or inclusion. And I appreciate that. Tell our folks what those three words mean for you and for Chesapeake.
Well, of course, those terms are, at least for me, were fairly new. And of course, they came about because of the whole incident with George Floyd and the kind of realization that as a society, we had some real issues that we need to address in this general area. But the idea of DEI has always been a part of my life, particularly as a leader. I have been, one of my, I think the strongest parts of my interest and experience in leadership is mentoring and supporting others who want to pursue that pathway. And I'm very proud to say that I have been involved in women, folks from the LGBT community, minorities. I have crossed the spectrum in people that I've supported who've gone from, in particular, becoming from faculty all the way up to now presidents. I'm very proud of my association with colleagues that I have worked with who have just recently, as of in the last couple of weeks, made it to the last and final highest rung of academic work. And I was very proud to be a part of their experience. I served in many cases, or some cases, on their dissertation committees when they were trying to get that union card for our business, which is a doctoral degree, whether it's a med doc or a PhD. And so that's been a very important part of my life. My background as an academic, my PhD is in Native American history and anthropology. I've been, of course, extremely moved by the recent study that came out of the Department of the Interior about just the horrendous story of what happened to Native American children in the educational system of both the government and the private sector, mostly religious organizations that sponsored Native American education. So I've been extremely sensitive to these issues for a very long time. In Montana, I worked with our Native American population. And of course, here in Chesapeake, we have significant African American and Hispanic populations that we want to see succeed. We had a brand new strategic plan that I led the effort for when I got here back in 2018. A component of that was already looking at diversity, in particular trying to diversify our faculty ranks, which we continue to be challenged by. But the DEI effort, as it came into being 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, has really put an emphasis on that for us. And we've really almost have a strategic plan within our strategic plan, looking to move the needle, in particular, on student success, and trying not just get students into Chesapeake, but get them through their courses of study, removing barriers, providing support for those things that are really the problem. It's not academics. Most students do not drop out of college because they're failing. They drop out of college because they can't get enough food, they can't get health care, they can't get transportation. It's non-academic factors in their life experience that take them away from us. So we're looking at all of those things. We're providing support where we can. Obviously, our resources are fairly limited. But towards that, we've applied for grants to help us with this, including a Title III capacity building grant, which we're hoping to hear positive news about in a short term, an Upward Bound grant, which will help us work with our high schools to support particularly minority students to get them to Chesapeake and help them succeed once they're here, because we have a TRIO grant already in place. Those are federal programs that help us do this work. And then lastly, we had, of course, as you know, historic allocation from our state government this year. That's a huge shot in the arm. And we're taking those resources and we're building on retention of our employees, which is critically important, but also putting resources into retention-focused positions that help us keep our students in college so they can finish whatever their goals are. So that, in a nutshell, is what we've been doing with DEI.
It's a lot. It's a lot. We'll continue doing the good work and continue hoping to do well. So as we get to a close here, back to Chesapeake more, at a macro level, if you had to kind of look 3 to 4 to 5 years out, so you have a strategic plan, what does that look like for you and for Chesapeake?
Well, first of all, we just entered our Middle States accreditation process that results in a 2-year site visit that will be here in 2024. I'm very anxious to complete that with flying colors, because that's going to document what we've been doing since I've gotten here to improve the student experience, to improve our portfolio, particularly in the skilled trades where we had some challenges and we needed to do better. My hope is to do what we do, but do it more and do it better. And that, in a nutshell, is my goal as the president of Chesapeake College. We have a gorgeous campus. We have awesome support from our counties. We have excellent support from the state of Maryland. As the former president, Stuart Bounds, once told me about Maryland, Cliff, where in the United States can you basically be guaranteed your funding on at least 2 of 3 accounts year to year? And after working in numerous state systems, as I have in my career, Maryland just does have a progressive approach to education that I very much prize, and is one of the reasons I am here. And I'm also very appreciative of my board of trustees. These are people that come from all walks of life: business, education, social work, military service. And together as a team, We want to take Chesapeake into the future. We want to get our students back that we lost in the last 18 to 24 months. And we want to come roaring out of the gates as we get into whatever the new normal is when we finally get past this COVID thing, which has been in no small way a catastrophe for this country. As we recognized yesterday, we had our flags at half staff, recognizing the loss of 1 million Americans.
Yes.
Probably an underestimate, but there's no question COVID has been something that we will spend some time recovering from.
Amen. I mean, that's well said and a great place to end. And so, Cliff, thank you. Dr. Coppersmith, thank you for your service to the state. Thank you for service to TEDCO. Look forward to seeing you soon. My plan is to visit the campus in the very near future. So appreciate you being on TEDCO Talks today. Thank you for all you do.
We look forward to your visit, Troy, and thank you for your leadership of TEDCO. It's been a pleasure to work with you and for you.
Thank you, buddy. To all the viewers and listeners, again, we appreciate you. We continue to great feedback. We continue to take that in and process it. And I want to again thank the team that produces this: Tammy Thomas, Cassie Haber, Hal, all these folks who do a tremendous job of making sure that we do this week in and week out. Thank you all. Thank you all for listening. This is Troy Stovall, the CEO of TEDCO Talks. Thanks again. Everybody be safe, sane, healthy, and blessed. Take care.